The morning I found the violation notice taped to my front door in Prescott Valley, Arizona, I nearly crushed my coffee mug in my bare hand. I had been living peacefully on my 12-acre property for 3 years, minding my own business, when apparently someone decided my old barn was suddenly a problem for the entire Copper Ridge Homeowners Association. I'm Lucas Porter, and I work as a logistics coordinator for what most people think is a boring agricultural supply company. The truth is considerably more complicated, but that's exactly how it needs to be. My property sits at the end of a long gravel road bordered by desert scrub and a few scattered homes that value privacy as much as I do. Or so I thought. The notice was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with an embossed seal that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. It stated that my barn, a weathered structure that had been standing since the 1950s, constituted an eyesore and violated Section 12.4 of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines. I had 30 days to either renovate it to meet modern standards or tear it down completely. I read the notice 3 times, each reading making my blood pressure climb a little higher. The barn wasn't just some random structure I was ignoring. It was the centerpiece of an active DEA surveillance operation that had been running for 18 months. Inside that supposedly offensive building sat approximately $2 million worth of surveillance equipment, 3 undercover agents on rotating shifts, and enough evidence to bring down one of the largest methamphetamine distribution networks operating between Phoenix and Las Vegas. But I couldn't exactly explain that to the HOA. I pulled out my phone and called my actual supervisor, Agent Marcus Reeves, who coordinated the task force from an office in Phoenix. He answered on the second ring. "We have a problem," I said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" Marcus had been with the DEA for 20 years and had the kind of calm voice that suggested he had heard every possible complication at least twice. The HOA kind. Someone filed a complaint about the barn. They want it renovated or demolished within 30 days. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear papers shuffling and the distant sound of office chatter. "You're joking." "I have the notice in my hand right now. It's signed by someone named Brenda Whitmore, president of the Copper Ridge HOA. Apparently, our operation is aesthetically displeasing to the neighborhood." Marcus let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. "Okay, don't do anything yet. Let me make some calls. We're too close to wrapping this up to relocate everything now. The suppliers are supposed to make their big delivery next week, and we finally have enough to move on the whole organization." What am I supposed to tell these people? They're going to want a response. Tell them you're looking into renovation options. Buy us time. I'll see if we can get someone from the legal department to figure out how to handle this without blowing our cover. I hung up feeling less than reassured. The DEA might be excellent at catching drug dealers, but I doubted they had much experience dealing with determined HOA presidents who probably spent their free time measuring grass heights with rulers. 2 days later, I found out exactly how determined Brenda Whitmore could be. I was replacing a fence post near the main road when a silver Lexus SUV pulled up to my driveway. The vehicle was immaculate, the kind of clean that suggested it got washed twice a week whether it needed it or not. A woman in her early 50s emerged, wearing white capri pants and a turquoise blouse that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her blonde hair was styled in that specific way that required both professional maintenance and industrial-strength hairspray. "Hello," she called out with the kind of enthusiasm that immediately put me on guard. "You must be Lucas Porter. I'm Brenda Whitmore, president of the Copper Ridge HOA." I set down my tools and walked over, keeping my expression neutral. "Nice to meet you. I got your notice about the barn." Her smile tightened slightly. "Yes, well, I'm glad we can discuss this in person. You see, we have certain standards in this community, and that structure has been a concern for quite some time." "Has it? I wasn't aware anyone could even see it from the road. It's set pretty far back on the property." Brenda's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "I personally conducted a tour of the neighborhood last month with our architectural review committee. We used binoculars to ensure we weren't missing any violations. Your barn is clearly visible from the Western Ridge Trail." She had used binoculars to spy on my property. I kept my expression carefully blank, but internally I was calculating just how much trouble we would be in if she decided to get more invasive with her inspections. "The barn is functional," I said carefully. I use it for storage and workshop space. That may be, but it's still an eyesore. The paint is peeling, the roof looks like it's one strong wind away from collapsing, and frankly, it brings down property values for everyone in the community. She pulled out a tablet from her designer handbag and started swiping through what appeared to be photographs of my property taken from various angles. I have documented extensive violations. Peeling paint here, damaged shingles here, and this section of the wall appears to be pulling away from the foundation. That last part made my stomach drop. The wall she was referring to had been deliberately modified 3 months ago to install additional ventilation for the equipment inside. From the exterior, it was supposed to look like ordinary structural wear. I'm planning to address the maintenance issues, I said, but a full renovation is expensive. I need time to get quotes and arrange financing. Brenda's expression shifted into something that resembled sympathy, but felt more like condescension. I understand that property maintenance can be costly. However, when you purchased your home in this community, you agreed to abide by our guidelines. Those guidelines exist to protect everyone's investment. If we let one property fall into disrepair, it sets a precedent. The barn was here long before the HOA existed, I pointed out. But it was grandfathered in under the condition that it be properly maintained, she countered smoothly. That's in the original covenant documents. I can provide you with a copy if you need to refresh your memory. She absolutely could, because I was certain she had every single page of HOA documentation memorized and probably slept with a printed copy under her pillow. I'll handle it, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Just give me the full 30 days. Of course. We're not unreasonable people, Mr. Porter. We simply want to maintain the character and value of our neighborhood. She smiled again, and I noticed her teeth were unnaturally white. I'll be checking in periodically to see how the renovations are progressing. It's always exciting to see properties being improved. She climbed back into her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with a growing sense of dread. I immediately called Marcus again. She showed up at my property, I said as soon as he answered. The HOA president? Yeah, and she has photographs. Detailed photographs taken with binoculars from the ridge trail. She's documented everything, including the ventilation modification we made in March. Marcus swore quietly. This is getting complicated. How much did she see? Nothing operational, but she's planning to check in periodically. If she shows up when the agents are rotating shifts or when we're receiving equipment deliveries, we're going to have a serious problem. Okay, I'm escalating this. We need to involve the U.S. Attorney's Office. There might be a way to get a protective order or some kind of legal barrier, but it's going to require explaining the situation to a judge. How long will that take? Longer than 30 days, probably. Can you stall her? I looked at the barn in the distance, its weathered wood sides looking particularly shabby in the harsh Arizona sunlight. I'll try, but this woman doesn't strike me as someone who accepts excuses easily. Over the next week, I learned exactly how persistent Brenda Whitmore could be. She drove by my property every single morning at exactly 8:15. On day 3, she stopped and asked if I had contacted any contractors yet. On day 5, she left a business card for her nephew, who apparently did construction work and could give me a good deal. On day 7, she brought another HOA board member with her, a thin man named Gerald, who didn't speak but took notes on everything while Brenda pointed out additional violations I hadn't even known existed. The agents inside the barn were getting nervous. I had to coordinate deliveries for 1 in the morning instead of the usual afternoon schedule. The surveillance of our targets continued, but everyone was on edge, constantly worried that Brenda would show up at the wrong moment and see something that would unravel 18 months of careful work. Marcus finally called with news on day 9. We have a meeting scheduled with Judge Patricia Hammond in federal court next week. She's been briefed on the general situation. We're going to request an emergency protective order that prevents the HOA from taking any action against your property while the operation is active. Will that work? It should, but there's a complication. We have to notify the HOA that they're subject to a federal order, which means they'll know something unusual is happening on your property. We can't tell them what, but they're not stupid. They're going to figure out it's law enforcement related. That's better than having Brenda walk in on Agent Torres reviewing surveillance footage of drug dealers. Agreed, just Hold tight for a few more days. Those few more days turned out to be more challenging than I expected. On day 11, Brenda showed up with a clipboard and what she called a preliminary renovation estimate from her nephew. The figure was astronomical, nearly $40,000 for a complete exterior restoration. "This is just the starting point," she said cheerfully, as if she wasn't discussing a sum that would bankrupt most people. "Of course, if you want to add modern touches like new windows or updated siding, the cost would increase accordingly." "I'll need to think about this," I said. Her cheerful expression faded slightly. "Mr. Porter, I hope you're taking this seriously. The HOA board is prepared to take legal action if necessary. We can place a lien on your property for non-compliance." "I understand the seriousness," I said, trying to keep my tone respectful while simultaneously wanting to explain that I was helping take down drug dealers who had been responsible for at least 8 overdose deaths in the past year. "I just need a little more time." "You have 19 days left," she said crisply. "I suggest you use them wisely." That evening, as I sat in my living room reviewing status reports from the team, I heard vehicles approaching. Not Brenda's Lexus, but something heavier. I looked out the window and saw 2 black SUVs pulling up my driveway, their headlights cutting through the desert darkness. Marcus emerged from the first vehicle, along with a woman in a dark suit who carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested serious authority. They were accompanied by 2 U.S. Marshals. "Lucas Porter?" the woman asked as I opened my door. "That's me. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh. We need to talk about your HOA problem." We sat around my kitchen table, and Jennifer laid out the situation with the kind of precision that made it clear she had prosecuted dozens of complicated cases. The DEA operation had reached a critical point. Their surveillance had identified a meeting scheduled for 6 days from now where the entire leadership of the distribution network would be present. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for, the chance to arrest everyone at once and dismantle the entire organization. "We can't relocate the operation," Marcus explained. "The barn provides perfect sight lines to the meeting location, and all of our equipment is calibrated specifically for this position. Moving everything would take weeks and would probably alert the targets that something is wrong." "So what's the plan?" I asked. Jennifer pulled out several documents from her briefcase. "Tomorrow morning, we're serving the Copper Ridge HOA with a federal protective order. The order will prohibit them from taking any action regarding your property, conducting any inspections, or making any public statements about the situation. The order will be sealed, which means they can't discuss it with anyone outside their legal counsel." "How are they going to react to that?" "Probably not well," Jennifer admitted. "HOA boards don't like being told they can't enforce their rules. But federal law supersedes HOA covenants, and this is a matter of national security importance. Drug trafficking is a federal crime, and interfering with an ongoing investigation is a serious matter. What do I tell Brenda if she shows up here demanding answers? You tell her to contact her attorney and refer them to my office. You don't confirm or deny anything about what's happening on your property. You don't discuss the federal order, you just direct all questions to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Marcus leaned forward. "We're also going to increase security around your property. We'll have marshals stationed at the entrance to your driveway. Anyone who tries to access your property without authorization will be turned away." I thought about Brenda and her binoculars, her tablet full of photographs, her determination to enforce every single HOA rule with absolute precision. She's going to lose her mind. Jennifer's expression suggested she had dealt with difficult people before. That's her prerogative. Our job is to protect an ongoing federal investigation. Her feelings about property aesthetics don't factor into that equation. The next morning, I watched from my window as a U.S. Marshal's vehicle parked itself at the end of my driveway. True to their word, the federal government had established a perimeter around my property. At 8:15, right on schedule, Brenda's silver Lexus appeared. She stopped when she saw the marshal's vehicle, and I could see her talking to the marshal through her car window. The conversation lasted several minutes, and I watched as Brenda's expression shifted from confusion to frustration to outright anger. She made a 3-point turn and drove away much faster than the posted speed limit. My phone rang 15 minutes later. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Porter, this is Brenda Whitmore. Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. There is a U.S. Marshal at your property preventing me from conducting official HOA business. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is completely unacceptable. You'll need to contact the U.S. Attorney's Office, I said, following Jennifer's instructions exactly. I'm not authorized to discuss the situation. Not authorized. This is an HOA matter. What could the federal government possibly have to do with a barn that needs renovation? All questions should be directed to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh. Her office number should have been provided to you with the protective order. What protective order? I haven't received any order. That was interesting. Then I suggest you check with your HOA attorney. I'm sure they've been notified. She hung up without another word. I felt a small sense of satisfaction, though I knew this was far from over. The HOA's attorney received the protective order at 9:30 that morning. By 10 o'clock, my phone was ringing again, this time from a number that identified itself as Copper Ridge HOA Legal Department. Mr. Porter, this is Richard Donovan, counsel for the Copper Ridge Homeowners Association. I've just been served with a federal protective order regarding your property. This is highly irregular. Can you explain what's happening? No, I can't. All inquiries need to go through the U.S. Attorney's Office. I understand you may be bound by some kind of confidentiality, but surely you can appreciate how concerning this is for the HOA. We have a responsibility to maintain property values and enforce our covenants. If there's some kind of law enforcement activity happening, we need to understand the scope and duration. I can't discuss it. I'm sorry. Richard Donovan let out a frustrated sigh. We're going to file a motion to have this protective order lifted. The HOA has rights too, and we're not going to simply abandon our responsibilities because of some vague federal directive. After he hung up, I called Marcus. The HOA's attorney says they're going to fight the protective order. Let them try. Judge Hammond was very clear about the importance of this operation. Unless they can prove the HOA's interests outweigh national security concerns, that order is staying in place. For the next 3 days, an uneasy standoff existed. Brenda drove by my property multiple times each day, but she never stopped when the marshals were present. I saw her sitting in her Lexus at the end of the street, watching through binoculars, probably documenting every vehicle that came and went. The HOA attorney filed his motion to lift the protective order, and Jennifer Walsh filed a response that I wasn't allowed to read, but that Marcus described as thoroughly crushing. Inside the barn, the agents continued their surveillance. The drug dealers were proceeding with their plans, unaware that every phone call, every meeting, and every transaction was being recorded and documented. And Agent Torres updated me each evening on their progress, speaking in careful code in case anyone was listening. The package delivery is still scheduled for Wednesday, she told me on Sunday evening. All the expected attendees have confirmed we're in good shape. Wednesday was 3 days away. We just had to hold everything together for 3 more days. On Monday, Brenda escalated. I was in town picking up supplies when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security cameras. 3 vehicles had pulled up to my property. Brenda's Lexus, a pickup truck I didn't recognize, and a white van with a local news station's logo on the side. I called Marcus immediately. We have a situation. Brenda brought the media to my property. Are you serious? There's a news van in my driveway right now. I could hear Marcus shouting orders to someone in his office. We're sending additional support. Do not, under any circumstances, talk to the reporters. The marshals will handle it. I drove back to my property as fast as traffic would allow, arriving 20 minutes later to find a scene that looked like something from a police standoff. The marshals had formed a physical barrier at the entrance to my driveway, preventing the news crew from advancing. Brenda stood near her Lexus, gesturing dramatically while a reporter with helmet-sprayed hair held a microphone toward her. The residents of Copper Ridge deserve to know what's happening in their community, Brenda was saying as I pulled up. We have federal agents blocking access to a property that's in clear violation of our community standards. What is being hidden? What don't they want us to see? The reporter, a woman whose name badge identified her as Christina Hayes from Channel 12 News, turned when she saw me approaching. Are you Lucas Porter, the property owner? No comment, I said, walking past her toward the marshals. Mr. Porter, Residents are concerned that dangerous criminal activity might be occurring in their neighborhood. Can you confirm or deny that federal law enforcement is conducting some kind of operation on your property? I kept walking. One of the marshals, a tall man named Thompson, intercepted me. Get inside your house. We've called for backup and instructions on how to handle the media presence. This is exactly what we didn't need, I muttered. Yeah, well, your HOA president apparently doesn't understand the concept of operational security. I made it inside my house and immediately closed all the curtains. Through a gap in the fabric, I could see Christina Hayes doing a stand-up report with my property visible in the background. Brenda had positioned herself perfectly in the frame, still talking animatedly about HOA violations and federal overreach. Marcus called. We have a serious problem. If this story airs tonight, it could alert our targets. They watch the news. If they see federal presence at a property in Prescott Valley, they might connect it to the operation. Can we stop the story from airing? The U.S. attorney is trying, but we can't prevent the media from reporting news. We can only request that they don't for national security reasons. Whether they comply is up to them. An hour later, Jennifer Walsh arrived with 2 additional attorneys from her office. They approached the news crew and had a conversation that lasted nearly 30 minutes. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see Christina Hayes making phone calls, probably to her station manager or legal department. Finally, the news van pulled away. Brenda looked furious, shouting something after them that I couldn't hear from inside my house. She stood in the middle of the street for another 10 minutes, eventually getting back in her Lexus and driving away with an aggressive acceleration that left skid marks on the pavement. Jennifer knocked on my door a few minutes later. We've secured an agreement from the news station. They won't air the story until after Wednesday evening, and when they do air it, they'll edit it to remove any identifying information about your specific location. What did you have to promise them? Exclusive access to the story after the operation concludes. If everything goes as planned, Wednesday, they'll get the first interview with the DEA team and footage of the arrests. It's a fair trade for operational security. What about Brenda? Jennifer's expression hardened. Mrs. Whitmore is dangerously close to obstruction of justice charges. We've drafted a cease and desist letter that will be delivered to her this evening. If she continues to interfere with this operation, we will arrest her. She's going to go nuclear. Then she'll go nuclear in a federal detention cell while she waits for her arraignment. Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Brenda didn't appear at my property, but I knew she hadn't given up. The HOA attorney called 3 more times, each call growing more frustrated as Jennifer Walsh refused to provide any information beyond the existence of the protective order. Inside the barn, the agents ran final checks on all their equipment. The surveillance operation had confirmed that the meeting would take place at a warehouse 15 miles away, and every member of the drug distribution network would be present. It was the culmination of 18 months of careful investigation, thousands of hours of surveillance, and coordination between multiple federal agencies. Wednesday morning arrived with crystal-clear Arizona skies. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but my nerves were stretched tight. The raid was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, timed precisely when the meeting was supposed to begin. At noon, Marcus arrived with a full tactical team. They staged at my property, using the barn as their coordination center. I stayed in my house, watching through the windows as men and women in tactical gear prepared for what was about to happen. At 1:30, Brenda's Lexus appeared at the end of the street. I called Marcus immediately. She's back. We don't have time for this. Thompson, go deal with her. Marshal Thompson walked down the driveway toward Brenda's vehicle. Through my binoculars, I could see them having a heated conversation. Brenda was gesturing wildly, pointing toward my property and the barn. Thompson remained calm, his body language suggesting professional authority that wouldn't be swayed by dramatics. Then, Brenda did something that shocked everyone. She tried to drive around Thompson, accelerating her Lexus up my driveway in an apparent attempt to force her way onto my property. Thompson had to dive out of the way. 2 other marshals immediately responded, drawing their weapons and ordering Brenda to stop her vehicle. She complied, but the damage was done. She had just assaulted a federal officer. Marcus came out of the barn, his expression thunderous. Take her into custody. Call the U.S. Attorney's office and let them know we have an obstruction charge. I watched as Brenda was removed from her vehicle and placed in handcuffs. She was shouting about her rights and HOA authority and federal overreach, but the marshals were professional and methodical. She was placed in the back of a marshal's vehicle, still protesting loudly. "We need to move now," Marcus said, checking his watch. "We're cutting this too close." The tactical team loaded into their vehicles and departed in a coordinated convoy. I was left alone on my property with a single marshal who had been assigned to maintain security. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I had no updates, no information, just my phone and my thoughts and the knowledge that somewhere 15 miles away, federal agents were either successfully arresting a major drug trafficking organization or walking into a situation that had gone terribly wrong. At 4:15, my phone rang. "Marcus." "We got them," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion and satisfaction in his voice. "All of them. 23 arrests, no shots fired, and enough evidence to put these people away for decades." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That's incredible." "Your property played a crucial role. The surveillance equipment in that barn captured everything we needed. Tell your HOA president that her Eyesore just helped save lives and take dangerous criminals off the street." "About Brenda," I started. "She's being processed downtown. Assault on a federal officer, obstruction of justice, and interfering with a federal investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office is taking this seriously. She's looking at potentially 5 years in federal prison." That seems harsh for an HOA president who is just trying to enforce her rules. Marcus's voice hardened. "She nearly compromised an 18-month investigation. She brought media attention to an active operation. She attempted to force her way onto federal property during a tactical staging. This isn't about HOA rules anymore. This is about someone who was so convinced of her own authority that she couldn't recognize when she was endangering lives." Over the next week, the full story came out. The DEA held a press conference announcing the arrests, and Christina Hayes got her exclusive interview as promised. The news coverage was extensive, detailing how a seemingly abandoned barn in Prescott Valley had served as the nerve center for a massive drug trafficking investigation. The Copper Ridge HOA held an emergency meeting 3 days after Brenda's arrest. I didn't attend, but I received a certified letter apologizing for any inconvenience and thanking me for my cooperation with federal law enforcement. The letter, signed by the interim HOA president, also included a formal withdrawal of the violation notice regarding my barn. Brenda's case moved through federal court with surprising speed. Her attorney tried to argue that she had been acting in good faith to enforce HOA regulations and hadn't understood the seriousness of the situation. The prosecution presented a different narrative. A woman who had been explicitly warned multiple times, who had been served with a federal protective order, and who had received a cease and desist letter, yet still chose to interfere with an active investigation. The judge wasn't sympathetic. In early June, Brenda Whitmore was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the DEA for the costs associated with additional security measures that had been necessary because of her interference. The HOA board quietly removed her from all positions and revoked her membership on any committees. Her husband, who had apparently been unaware of the extent of her actions, filed for divorce while she was awaiting transport to the federal prison in Dublin, California. As for me, the DEA dismantled the surveillance equipment in the barn, but they left behind a personal thank you note signed by every agent who had worked the case. The note included a particular message from Agent Torres. "Thanks for putting up with our mess and for being the most patient civilian operative we've ever worked with." Marcus stopped by one final time before returning to Phoenix full-time. We sat on my porch, drinking coffee and watching the Arizona sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "What are you going to do with the barn now?" he asked. I looked at the weathered structure, its peeling paint and shabby roof suddenly looking less offensive now that I knew what it had accomplished. I might actually renovate it. Not because the HOA demands it, but because it deserves better after everything it's been through. That seems fitting. Marcus finished his coffee and stood to leave. "If you ever need work again, we could use someone with your skills. You stayed calm under pressure, followed instructions, and didn't panic when things got complicated. I'll think about it, though hopefully the next assignment won't involve quite so much HOA drama. Marcus laughed. No promises. You'd be surprised how often property issues complicate federal operations. After he left, I walked down to the barn and stepped inside. The space looked empty now, all the equipment removed and the surveillance stations dismantled. But if I closed my eyes, I could still sense the presence of the agents who had spent countless hours here, watching and waiting and building their case against dangerous criminals. The barn had been called an eyesore, a violation of community standards, a blight on property values. But it had also been a fortress of justice, a hidden watchtower that protected the innocent and gathered evidence against those who profited from human suffering. In July, I started the renovation work. I hired a local contractor, not Brenda's nephew, who helped me repair the roof, replace damaged siding, and paint the exterior a rich barn red that honored the structure's agricultural heritage. The work took 6 weeks and cost considerably less than Brenda's inflated estimate. The new interim HOA president, a retired teacher named Dorothy Chen, stopped by during the renovation to check on progress. Unlike Brenda, she arrived with genuine interest rather than clipboard-armed antagonism. "The barn looks wonderful," she said, examining the new roof. "I heard about what happened here. The whole neighborhood heard, actually. I wanted to apologize on behalf of the HOA. Brenda's behavior was inexcusable." "She was just trying to do her job as she understood it," I said, feeling generous now that the crisis had passed. Dorothy shook her head. "There's doing your job, and then there's being unable to accept that sometimes there are bigger priorities than paint colors and property aesthetics. Brenda never understood that distinction. The board is implementing new policies to prevent this kind of situation in the future. We're adding language about cooperation with law enforcement and recognition of federal authority. That's probably wise. We're also revising our enforcement procedures. No more binoculars and surprise inspections. If there's a concern, we'll reach out respectfully and work with homeowners rather than threatening them with fines and liens." After she left, I continued working on the barn, taking satisfaction in each repair and improvement. The structure that had caused so much conflict was slowly transforming into something I could actually be proud of. In September, I received an invitation to a ceremony in Phoenix. The DEA was recognizing everyone who had contributed to the investigation, and my name was on the list. I drove down for the event, wearing one of the 3 dress shirts I owned and feeling distinctly out of place among federal agents in suits. Marcus found me immediately. "Lucas, glad you could make it. Come on, there are people who want to meet you." He introduced me to the regional director, several assistant directors, and a deputy administrator who had flown in from Washington. They all thanked me for my cooperation and emphasized how critical my property had been to the operation's success. Agent Torres pulled me aside during the reception. "I heard you renovated the barn. I'd love to see it sometime. You're welcome to visit whenever you want, though I promise it's much less interesting now that you've removed all the surveillance equipment." She smiled. I spent 4 months doing rotating shifts in that barn. I watched more boring phone conversations and empty warehouse footage than any human should have to endure. But every tedious hour was worth it when we finally moved in and arrested those people. You made that possible. The ceremony included a presentation of the evidence they had gathered and the impact of the arrests. The distribution network had been responsible for moving approximately 200 kilograms of methamphetamine per month through Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California. Their arrest had disrupted supply chains, prevented countless overdoses, and dismantled an organization that had been operating for nearly 5 years. During the presentation, I thought about Brenda and her binoculars, her clipboard full of violations, her absolute certainty that enforcing HOA regulations was the most important responsibility anyone could have. She was sitting in a federal prison right now, probably still convinced that she had been unfairly persecuted for simply trying to maintain community standards. The truth was more complicated. She hadn't been wrong that the barn looked shabby. The paint really was peeling. The roof really did need repairs. And from a purely aesthetic standpoint, the structure probably did impact property values. But she had been so fixated on those surface issues that she couldn't recognize when something more important was at stake. She had been given every opportunity to step back, to trust that there was a legitimate reason for the federal presence, but her need to maintain control had overridden every warning and every reasonable boundary. I drove home that evening thinking about priorities and perspective. The barn renovation was nearly complete, and I had to admit it looked significantly better than before. But the real value of that structure had nothing to do with its appearance. Its value lay in what it had enabled: justice, accountability, and protection for communities being devastated by drug trafficking. In October, I received a letter from Brenda's attorney. She was appealing her sentence, arguing that 2 years in federal prison was excessive for someone who had been acting in her capacity as HOA president. The letter requested that I provide a statement supporting her appeal, emphasizing that she hadn't intended to interfere with a federal investigation and had been motivated by genuine concern for the community. I read the letter twice and then filed it in my recycling bin. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I also wasn't going to help reduce the consequences she faced for her actions. She had been warned repeatedly, had been served with federal orders, and had still chosen to escalate. Those choices had consequences. Her appeal was denied in December. She would serve her full sentence. The Copper Ridge HOA underwent significant changes in the months following Brenda's arrest. Dorothy Chen implemented the revised policies she had mentioned, and the entire culture of the organization shifted from enforcement-focused to community-focused. Instead of hunting for violations, the board started organizing neighborhood events and creating programs to help homeowners maintain their properties. I even volunteered to serve on the Architectural Review Committee, which amused Marcus to no end when I told him. "You're voluntarily joining the organization that tried to shut down a federal operation?" Different people, different approach, and honestly, HOAs serve a purpose when they're not run by people who treat rule enforcement like a holy mission. My renovated barn became something of a minor celebrity in the neighborhood. People would drive by slowly, pointing it out to passengers and explaining that it had been part of a major DEA operation. A few neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves and express their gratitude that I had helped law enforcement, though I always deflected by saying I had just owned the property, and the real heroes were the agents who did the actual work. In early spring, almost exactly a year after the original violation notice had appeared on my door, I hosted a small gathering at my property. Marcus drove up from Phoenix, bringing several agents who had worked the case. Agent Torres came, along with Jennifer Walsh and even Marshall Thompson. We grilled steaks, drank beer, and told stories about the operation, about Brenda's increasingly frantic attempts to enforce HOA regulations, and about the moment when everyone realized she was about to drive her Lexus through a federal security perimeter. "I still can't believe she actually tried to run me over," Thompson said, shaking his head. "I've dealt with armed suspects who were more reasonable." "She really believed the HOA authority superseded everything else," Jennifer added. "During her trial, she kept insisting that she had a duty to enforce the covenants and that federal agents should have respected that duty." "How's she doing in prison?" I asked, feeling curious despite myself. Jennifer's expression suggested she had mixed feelings about the question. According to her attorney, she's having a difficult time. Federal prison isn't designed for middle-aged HOA presidents who've never faced serious consequences before. She's in a minimum security facility, but it's still a significant adjustment. I felt a brief flicker of sympathy, but pushed it aside. Brenda had made choices, and those choices had nearly compromised an operation that saved lives. Sympathy didn't change that reality. As the evening wound down and my guests began departing, Marcus lingered behind. We walked down to the barn together, admiring the renovation work in the fading light. "You did good work here," he said, gesturing to the fresh paint and new roof, "both with the building and with everything else. I just tried to not panic while you all did the real work. That's more valuable than you realize. Civilians who can stay calm during complicated operations are rare. We had a backup location identified, but it would have delayed everything by months and possibly allowed our targets to slip away. You held this together when it mattered most." After everyone left, I sat on my porch with a final beer, watching the stars emerge over the Arizona desert. The barn stood solid and renewed in the darkness, its fresh paint invisible, but its presence somehow more substantial than before. I thought about the strange journey that had started with a violation notice and ended with federal arrests, prison sentences, and a completely renovated barn. I thought about how a simple disagreement over property aesthetics had escalated into a crisis that involved U.S. attorneys, federal judges, and tactical teams. Most of all, I thought about perspective. Brenda had seen an eyesore that violated community standards. She hadn't been wrong about the barn's appearance, but she had been spectacularly wrong about its importance. Her inability to recognize that some things matter more than HOA regulations had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom, and even her marriage. The barn had always been more than its weathered exterior suggested. Now, renovated and renewed, it stood as a reminder that value isn't always visible from the outside. Sometimes the most important things are hidden behind peeling paint and damaged shingles, doing critical work that few people will ever know about. I finished my beer and headed inside, leaving the barn to stand watch over the desert night. Whatever the future held, I knew that structure had earned its place on my property. It had served with distinction in the quiet war against those who profited from human suffering. No HOA violation notice would ever change that.